Imagine a family once seen as hip-hop royalty, now falling apart from the inside. Divorce, arrests, and silence have turned T.I. and Tiny's story into a cautionary tale. The real question: who truly broke the Harris legacy? Picture this. A mother files for divorce, a son sits in jail, and a father, who once preached loyalty and family, remains silent. This isn't just celebrity drama. It's a family breaking apart in front of the world. One night at a gas station, a BMW, the smell of weed, and a gun flipped King Harris's life upside down. But the real shock came after the arrest, when T.I. turned his back on his own son. Love, loyalty, and an empire once thought untouchable, all shattered in a single decision. Tiny filed the divorce papers, T.I. stayed silent, and King's scandal exposed everything. So is this the end of the Harris empire, or just another chapter? For years, King Harris seemed like a young man desperate to prove himself. To many, it looked like he was just trying to step out of his father's shadow and show the world that he was grown too. But instead of carving out a respectable name, his choices kept dragging him and his family into chaos. The turning point came when his mother, Tiny, finally filed for divorce from T.I. After years of surviving ups and downs, she had finally reached the end of her patience. This wasn't like the other times, when rumors swirled and people speculated about breakups only for the couple to patch things up later. No, this time, there was no pause, no hesitation, and no second chances. She signed the papers and set them in motion without looking back. What truly stunned people, though, wasn't just the divorce itself. Fans had been whispering for years that their marriage was more fragile than it appeared. What shocked them was T.I.'s reaction. Or, rather, his lack of one. He didn't fight. He didn't beg. He didn't launch some public display to prove his love or attempt to hold the pieces of his family together. Instead, he let the relationship fall apart as if it no longer held value. For someone who had once rapped about loyalty, family, and legacy, his silence was deafening. To outsiders, it looked cold. But to those closer to the situation, it looked like resignation. T.I. seemed to believe he had already done his part. He had already raised his children, already tried to lead his household, already spoken his warnings. If things were going to unravel, he wasn't going to stop them. In his mind, maybe this was the natural consequence of years of choices, both his and everyone else's. But for Tiny, his indifference cut deeper than any argument could. She had carried the weight of the marriage for decades. From the early days, when T.I. was in and out of prison, she was the one holding down the family, raising their children, and trying to protect their image in the public eye. Every time he made a mistake, she patched things up. Every time a scandal broke, she held her chin high. Even during their reality TV days, when cameras captured both the glamorous and messy sides of their relationship, she stood firm. And yet, when it was finally her turn to demand stability and accountability, he gave her nothing but silence. For many fans, this became a mirror into the deeper cracks that had always existed in their relationship. Their love story was often painted as a roller coaster, passionate but turbulent, resilient yet toxic. They had endured rumors of infidelity, legal troubles, public arguments, and the constant pressure of fame. Each time, they bounced back. Each time, they reassured the public that love was worth fighting for. That's why so many believed nothing could break them. But the truth was, the fractures were already there, spreading slowly like fault lines under the surface. What happened with King only widened them until the marriage could no longer stand. King's arrest, and the chain of reckless behavior leading up to it, was more than a son's downfall. It was a reflection of the household itself. To Tiny, her son's spiral wasn't just about peer pressure or youthful mistakes. It was about the absence of structure, the confusion of being raised in two different worlds, and the lack of consistent parenting. And while T.I. believed he had warned King enough times, Tiny believed those warnings were too little, too late. So when T.I. chose to distance himself from his son after the arrest, treating it as if it were King's problem alone, Tiny saw that as abandonment. To her, it wasn't just about parenting styles. It was about accountability. How could he stand before the world, proud of his music, his empire, and his reputation, yet refuse to fight for his family in the same way? By the time she filed for divorce, it wasn't just about one fight, one scandal, or even one son's mistakes. It was about years of bottled pain finally spilling over. In her filings, Tiny reportedly pointed to infidelity, emotional neglect, and T.I.'s unwillingness to face the consequences of his actions. She had watched him walk in and out of their lives, watched him put his career before his family, and watched him set the very example that King was now copying. She wasn't just leaving a husband, she was breaking away from a cycle. The public response was divided. Some sympathized with Tiny, praising her for finally choosing herself after decades of standing by her man. Others criticized her timing, saying she should have left long ago if she was truly unhappy. And then there were those who placed the blame on King, arguing that his reckless choices had torn the family apart. But for Tiny, it wasn't about what outsiders thought. It wasn't about money, clout, or headlines. It was about peace. About finally laying down the burden of holding a crumbling family together. About drawing a line between what she could endure and what she no longer would. As for T.I., his silence remained his loudest statement. He didn't fight the divorce. He didn't try to spin the narrative. He simply let it happen, the same way he let his marriage erode. Whether this was pride, exhaustion, or acceptance, only he knows. What is clear is that the Harris legacy, once seen as a hip-hop fairy tale, now looks more like a cautionary tale. Fame, money, and power can't protect a family from breaking apart when the foundation is already cracked. And so, the question lingers, was this truly the end of the Harris empire, or just another chapter in a story that has always thrived on drama, conflict, and survival? For now, one thing is certain: Tiny is done cleaning up behind closed doors, and T.I. will have to decide if silence is really the legacy he wants to leave. Worse still, he pulled away from his son right after King's arrest, leaving the young man to face the fallout alone. It wasn't just a matter of legal trouble, it was the emotional weight that came with being abandoned at the moment he needed his father the most. For King, the silence was deafening. For the family, it marked the start of a painful divide. Almost overnight, the household fractured. Relatives who once gathered together found themselves on opposite sides of the argument. Some defended T.I., saying he had already given King more than enough guidance, money, and chances. In their eyes, the arrest was proof that the boy had ignored every warning. Others pointed at T.I. himself, claiming that his absence as a consistent father figure had created the very space for King's reckless behavior to grow unchecked. What had once been family unity quickly turned into a blame game. Friends, too, were forced to choose where their loyalty lay. Some stood beside King, insisting that he was simply a young man lost in the spotlight, trying too hard to prove himself. They argued that his mistakes were not so different from what many young adults go through, except his were magnified under cameras and headlines. Others sided with Tiny, who felt the weight of responsibility now rested on her shoulders. She had to pick up the pieces, defend her son's dignity, and endure the whispers of a public that had always expected the Harris family to be flawless. Meanwhile, the public conversation took on a life of its own. Comment sections, talk shows, and gossip blogs filled with the same haunting question: was King simply the product of his parents' mistakes, or had he thrown away the advantages he was born into by chasing a dangerous image? It was a question with no easy answer. On one hand, King had grown up in luxury mansions, private schools, and opportunities most kids only dream of. He had access to resources, mentors, and a support system that could have set him on a smooth path to success. To many outsiders, it looked like he squandered a golden ticket in exchange for clout and street credibility. But on the other hand, growing up in a high-profile household brought its own kind of scars. King had been raised in the shadows of fame, with cameras documenting his every move and critics dissecting his every mistake. Instead of a normal childhood, he inherited pressure, scrutiny, and a family dynamic that was anything but stable. For some observers, his arrest was less about wasted opportunity and more about being shaped by the chaos he grew up in. The truth probably lies somewhere in the middle. Yes, King made choices that led him down a reckless path. But those choices didn't form in isolation. They were influenced by years of family conflict, mixed messages about responsibility, and the constant push and pull between privilege and rebellion. And so, while the courtroom dealt with the legal side of King's actions, the real trial was unfolding inside his family. Trust was broken. Sides were taken. And the silence between father and son grew wider, leaving the public to wonder if the Harris legacy had finally collapsed under the weight of its own contradictions. The truth is, cracks had been showing in T.I. and Tiny's marriage for years. Scandals, headlines, and reality TV drama, they had survived it all. But October 2024 was different. That month, King's arrest didn't just drag his name through the mud, it dragged the entire Harris family into the spotlight again. The incident was messy. King sped away from a gas station in his BMW, nearly colliding with a police cruiser. Officers who pulled him over said the car reeked of weed, and when they searched him, they found a gun tucked in his waistband. What should have been a bad night quickly turned into a disaster. Police soon discovered there was already an outstanding warrant against him, dating back to 2022, for speeding, DUI, and driving with a suspended license. This wasn't a one-off mistake. It was a pattern of behavior catching up with him. Still, there was a surprising twist. In the leaked arrest video, King didn't lash out like he normally did. Instead, he stayed calm, even cooperative. For someone known for being brash and outspoken, the shift in his demeanor was striking. Some viewers even thought they saw regret in his eyes, like he finally realized the weight of his actions. But calm or not, it didn't change the outcome. He was cuffed, booked into county jail, and later transferred once the warrant resurfaced. When the video hit the internet, reactions were brutal. Comment sections lit up with jokes, insults, and disappointment. Some people called him spoiled, others mocked him as a trust fund prison punk. A few pointed out the irony of him acting like he came from struggle while living off his parents' money. And the backlash didn't stop with him, it hit his parents too. Tiny reportedly cited King's downward spiral as the final straw in her divorce filings. For her, his behavior was proof that their family foundation had collapsed. And again, T.I. didn't fight it. Instead, he doubled down, saying he had already done his part as a father and that the rest was on King. Harsh as that sounded, T.I. had been warning about this outcome for years. As far back as 2022, when King's wild antics kept making headlines, T.I. openly admitted he feared his son was headed straight for prison. He said he'd already told Tiny, the grandmothers, and King himself. From his perspective, it wasn't just fatherly concern, it was experience. He recognized the same destructive energy he once carried himself. But Tiny didn't agree. In her eyes, T.I. had failed to be the consistent, present father King needed. She pointed out that during King's childhood, T.I. was often behind bars. And even after coming home, his involvement was limited, so much so that King was mostly raised by his grandmother. King himself admitted that despite his parents' wealth, he didn't grow up in their mansion. He lived at his grandma's house, only visiting his parents' flashy lifestyle when the reality TV cameras were rolling. That disconnect left scars. King felt torn between two worlds, raised modestly, yet surrounded by fame and wealth. Over time, he leaned into rebellion, acting out in public, stirring controversy, and chasing a street persona he didn't need. One of the clearest examples came in 2022, when he infamously caused a scene at a Waffle House because his order came with pickles after he specifically asked for none. What should have been a minor annoyance spiraled into a public meltdown, reinforcing his reputation for being entitled and reckless. Looking back, it's clear the warning signs were there long before October 2024. King had been spiraling, and while his parents pointed at each other, he kept walking further into trouble. His story has become a harsh lesson about family, fame, and what happens when privilege collides with poor choices. Sometimes it doesn't take much to set King Harris off. One wrong food order was all it took at a Waffle House. When his meal came with pickles he didn't want, King exploded on the employee, shouting, flexing money, and recording the whole thing for social media. Instead of looking tough, he came across as entitled and out of control. Viewers instantly questioned why T.I. had let his son grow up without boundaries. That same frustration was what led T.I. to publicly warn King in a later video. But by then, Tiny had had enough. She fired back that all those warnings should have been given years earlier, long before their son was already spiraling. For a while, things stayed tense but manageable. That changed at an Atlanta Falcons game when father and son clashed in front of a packed stadium. The fight started after King claimed he didn't grow up privileged. T.I. snapped instantly, shutting him down, reminding him that he had been raised with every advantage possible. King pushed back hard, insisting he never lived with a silver spoon. Words turned into shoves, and suddenly, fists were flying between father and son. The guns, the reckless stunts, the outbursts, it all feels like a performance to prove something to his dad. Some fans even speculated King got himself arrested on purpose, hoping to finally be seen as cut from the same cloth. Others believed his antics were less about rebellion and more about a desperate cry for respect. That theory only grew stronger when King linked up with Boosie's son, 2D Raw. Instead of focusing on rap videos, the two turned their content into a showcase of guns and bravado. Both fathers stepped in, and the tone shifted immediately. You could hear the disappointment in their voices as they warned their sons that one wrong move could ruin their futures forever. What had started as teenage flexing suddenly turned into a serious moment of reality. T.I. in particular didn't hold back, telling King that flashing guns and hanging around the wrong people could lead straight to felony charges. He knew the system, and his warning came from lived experience. For a moment, it looked like he was genuinely trying to steer his son away from disaster. But Tiny wasn't impressed. She wasn't angry about the lecture itself. She was angry that T.I. had let things reach this point in the first place. To her, it felt hypocritical. King wasn't inventing this reckless behavior. He was modeling it after the man who now claimed to be guiding him. The family drama only deepened when King's personal life started making headlines. During a podcast, T.I. casually announced he was about to become a grandfather again because King was having a baby. That revelation, dropped so casually, only fueled the conversation that the Harris family was unraveling in real time. Not long ago, King Harris stepped into a whole new chapter of life, fatherhood. T.I. casually broke the news during an interview, sharing that he now had 2 granddaughters and a grandson on the way. Then, in typical T.I. fashion, he cracked a joke, saying he'd raise King's son to torture him the way King tortured me. To Tiny, though, that joke wasn't funny at all. She felt like T.I. was glorifying the very behavior that had nearly derailed their son's life. The drama only got louder when rumors spread about King's baby mama, Big Nana. Whispers claimed she was much older than him and might be using King as her ticket to quick money. King didn't seem to care. He was thrilled about being a dad. When his son was born in November 2024, he lit up social media with posts, late-night baby updates, and even a heartfelt track titled Dear Son. He proudly captioned one photo, November 5th, 8:09 a.m., welcome King Jr. time to take over. For a moment, it looked like fatherhood might finally ground him. He spoke about sleepless nights, walking his newborn around the house, and even doing little live concerts with the baby in his arms. Fans saw a softer, more mature side of King, and Tiny was relieved. At last, there was a glimpse of hope, a chance that King could break the cycle and be the father T.I. hadn't always been. But the glow didn't last. Even as King embraced his new role, his arrest footage was still making the rounds online, reminding everyone that his legal troubles were far from over. No matter how many diapers he changed or songs he recorded, his reputation was already tangled in controversy. Meanwhile, T.I. tried to play the part of a supportive dad, but the disappointment on his face told another story. And for Tiny, that was the final straw. She had endured the cheating, the public fights, and the scandals for years, but watching T.I. distance himself from their son, almost ashamed to even share a roof with him, was too much to bear. So when Tiny finally filed for divorce, nobody was shocked. To her, it wasn't about money or fame, it was about peace. After decades of holding things together, she was done cleaning up T.I.'s mess, done covering for his flaws, and done watching their family unravel. Now, the big question is what T.I. does next. Will he own up to the part he played and try to rebuild, or will he stay silent like he has with King, letting the damage speak louder than his words? Because if he stays quiet, it's not just the end of a marriage, it's the slow collapse of the Harris family legacy. One thing's certain, this story is still unfolding, and the streets won't stop talking anytime soon.